Hey guys, this is Coach Barryline, and this is going to be your next video lesson installment. This will be the last video lesson for Unit 2, so we're coming up on a formative assessment, so we need to make sure that you're getting into your I can statements and unit objectives and making sure that you've got all the appropriate information to study for that test. All right, so we're talking about life in the 20th century and how life has changed according to as a result of industrialization. So we're going to kind of continue that discussion today and talk specifically about some certain groups that see huge changes and areas that see huge changes in their culture and society. So there are a lot of new immigrants coming around, and really in American history you have these waves of immigration where during certain time periods immigrants are coming from specific places. So from the beginning of the nation in 1800 to the late 1800s, the 1880s, most of your immigrants come from Northern and Western Europe. About 10 million immigrants came to the United States during that time period, and most were from Ireland or England or Germany, France, places of that nature. All right, so you see your little graphic here. You got your people floating over from Northern Europe. However, from 1880 to 1910, immigration increased to 18 million. So in a 20-year period, you have a huge influx of immigrants. Almost twice as many immigrants come in during that 20-year period as, I'm sorry, 30-year period as came in the whole 80 years prior to that. And most of these immigrants are from Southern and Eastern Europe. So you see that we've changed where immigrants are coming from. Now, new immigrants made the United States more diverse, both ethnically and religiously. Many Eastern Europeans were Slavs or other different types of ethnic groups that had not been represented by earlier waves of immigration that much. And also many of these immigrants were Catholic. You're talking about people from Spain, Italy, Greece, and the Balkans. So you're going to have a lot of diversity, and this causes conflict. But by 1910, 1 out of 7 Americans was actually foreign born. It's a huge shift in population. Most European immigrants coming to the U.S. sailed into Ellis Island, which is off the coast of New York City, obviously. Asian immigrants sailed into Angel Island, which was obviously in California, and many faced hardships, not just on their journeys, but once they got to America, immigrants were often forced into tenement apartments. Low-paying jobs were the norm, and as a result, many kind of choose to live near others from their home country. You have what you call enclaving. And what happens in enclaving is that, I should say many choose because that's the only choice available to them as well, but enclaving is when people of the same ethnic group or racial group or religious group live in neighborhoods that are predominantly that group. And you see this oftentimes with immigrants. That's how you have the development of say, Chinatowns in San Francisco or New York, really in any big city. New York, you have Little Italy, places like that. Reactions to immigration or to immigrants were mixed, but you did have the rise or the return of the nativist movement during this period. And these were native-born Americans, people who were born in the United States and saw immigration and immigrants as a threat. And these people often blamed immigrants for any number of problems: crime, poverty, unemployment. And you see this kind of anti-immigrant nativist belief system in the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which is really the first federal law governing immigration. They see a lot of discrimination, especially against Asian immigrants in the West, because it makes sense. It's easier to identify an Asian immigrant than maybe it is to identify somebody from another part of Europe, right? So um, the Chinese Exclusion Act basically eliminates Chinese immigration, makes it nearly impossible for Chinese immigrants to gain citizenship and all those sorts of things. Japanese face discrimination as well throughout the West, but specifically in California, where you see places like San Francisco pass segregation laws against Asians in general and Japanese in particular. So you have this move in many other parts of the United States to Americanize immigrant groups or help them assimilate or blend in to American society. Now, urban life in America was becoming increasingly difficult at this time. Crowding was a problem, or overcrowding was a problem, and so cities began to grow up. You see the development of skyscrapers for the first time to help deal with the issue, the very real issue of just space, having enough space for stuff. So skyscrapers begin to develop during this time. You guys probably seen this famous picture. Actually, if you in my room, you've seen it every day. So this is called New York Lunch, and it shows some riveters, some workers on skyscrapers eating their lunch. Anyway, you also start to have the development of city planning and urban parks be developed. If you look in the background here, you'll see Central Park, and of course this is Central Park here. So you start to have cities recognize the importance of green space and things of that nature. Now, class inequalities emerge as a result of industrialization, or worsen as a result of industrialization. And you guys have read about that. We've talked about that with social Darwinism and those types of things. But, for the most part, the wealthy live in luxury. You have a pretty good look at a wealthy home, wealthy urban dwelling here. Nice furniture, rugs, all that kind of stuff. However, that's not the case in the case of the working class. The middle class is made up of professionals such as doctors, lawyers, managers, bankers, people like that work in jobs that are supervisory or that require some advanced skills. They are going to make up the middle class, and in general they live pretty well too. And in fact, during this period you have the middle class kind of changes from being a distinct middle class to trying to emulate the ways and the lives of the upper class. Meanwhile, working class Americans at this time lived in tenements, oftentimes, or crowded into poorly lit buildings with few windows and very little ventilation. And one of the worst problems was poor sanitation. These homes were oftentimes very small. Sometimes tenement apartment buildings would have one bathroom for the entire building, if they had one at all. And this was a continuous problem for immigrants moving into the cities. You did have the development, however, of groups and organizations that tried to help immigrants. And many women at the time were very active in this. They believed in a type of theology called the social gospel, which is the belief that Christians should try to help the poor and the downtrodden and things of that nature. So you did have the development of settlement houses, which provided services to immigrants. And probably the most famous example of settlement houses was the Hull House in Chicago, which was founded by Jane Addams. And settlement houses were places where immigrants could board, they could live, and they could maybe take classes to learn English or learn how to read or things of that nature, and develop skills to try to help them in the workforce. Now, in the cities especially, Political corruption was an epic problem at this time. You had political scandals. The Grant administration was incredibly corrupt. Although it's unclear how involved Grant was himself personally, it seems like more likely it was that he was just too hands-off in his approach to governing. In New York City, you had the Tammany Hall ring that was run by the political machine that was run by Boss Tweed. And as a result, you have many reform movements against this. And we'll talk more again about this in the next unit. But one of the reform movements was the National Grange. And this was actually an organization of farmers that wanted to regulate the railroads. The railroads were charging outrageous rates for shipping agricultural products, and farmers were not able to make a lot of money because of it. And the Grange does gain sufficient influence to get the Interstate Commerce Act of 1887 passed, which basically allows the federal government to regulate commerce between the states. All right, so out of the National Grange, you have this kind of odd combination or coalition form and develop the Populist Party. And the Populist Party is an alliance of farmers and laborers that try to work together to push to influence policymakers. One of the Populist Party's main issues was the silverback currency. And the reason why is because inflation was good for farmers, because if you buy a piece of land for $100,000, well, as you go along, $100,000 ain't going to be as much, but that original loan is not going to adjust for inflation. And their main champion was William Jennings Bryan. You have a picture of Grant here, obviously. Boss Tweed is a political cartoon about Boss Tweed, and there's William Jennings Bryan. Now, segregation and discrimination was a reality for many groups, especially for African Americans during this time. Jim Crow laws became increasingly more popular after the end of Reconstruction, which forced segregation in public places and were first passed in Tennessee in 1881. Generally included all public places, including schools. You did have in 1896 Plessy versus Ferguson, in which this was challenged but upheld by the court. And the court basically established in Plessy versus Ferguson that facilities could be separate so long as they were equal. And this allows segregation to exist for almost 60 years afterward. And you've seen the pictures of colored and white bathrooms and water fountains and things of that nature. Another major problem was lynching, which skyrocketed in the post-Reconstruction period. And lynching is the murder of an individual by group or mob, usually when they are accused of some sort of crime, whether they've been arrested or not. Between 1882 and 1892, 10 years, 900 black Americans that we know of were lynched in the South. So this was common practice and often condoned by local officials. And lynching could take many forms, most often hanging, but any kind of murder without the benefit of a trial would have been considered lynching. Two major African American figures that emerged in fighting for racial equality are Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, who both have different views. Washington believes that the best way to Americans achieve equality is through gradually improving their situation through vocational education. So he founded the Tuskegee Institute to help teach blacks trades, basically. On the other hand, you had W.E.B. Du Bois, who was Harvard educated, and he believed African Americans should press for equal rights immediately. He was the founder of the Niagara movement, which developed into the NAACP. So two very different views. One was a gradualist. One was an immediate. Expected immediate rights, and so those two had many public debates through their writings. Obviously, Hispanic Americans faced discrimination. Also, debt peonage, which was basically slavery. They were forced to stay on farms and work there. Asian Americans faced segregation laws and housing discrimination. And of course, Native Americans faced the destruction of their cultures and poverty on reservations. So we'll talk more about society's reaction to these problems next time.